Imagine you wake up one morning and discover that the world's most powerful central bank, the United States Federal Reserve, has lost its independence. Suddenly, the very institution responsible for guarding the value of your savings, the stability of your job, and even the price of your morning cup of coffee, is now subject to the whims of political leaders. The idea might sound far-fetched, even alarming, but right now, the Fed is facing a level of political pressure not seen in decades, and the outcome could send shockwaves through every corner of the global economy. To truly grasp what's at stake, let's start by understanding what the Federal Reserve actually is. The Fed is not just another government office tucked away in Washington, D.C. Since its creation in the year 1913, following a series of devastating financial panics, the Federal Reserve has been the cornerstone of America's economic system. Its primary roles are threefold: to manage inflation, keep unemployment as low as possible, and ensure the stability of the nation's financial system. The Fed does all of this by controlling the flow of money in the economy. Through powerful tools like setting interest rates and buying or selling government securities, it can encourage borrowing and spending when times are tough, or cool things down if inflation threatens to spiral out of control. The person at the helm, the Fed Chair, is one of the most influential figures in the world. Right now, that person is Jerome Powell, a name that, until recently, was mostly known only to economists and Wall Street insiders. But recent events have thrust Powell into the global spotlight, placing him, and the institution he leads, at the center of a monumental tug-of-war between economic prudence and political ambition. The independence of the Federal Reserve is a guiding principle that has underpinned America's economic strength for more than a century. The logic is simple. Monetary policy decisions, like when to raise or lower interest rates, should be based on data and expert analysis, not political expediency or short-term electoral gain. This insulation from political interference allows the Fed to make sometimes unpopular decisions that are necessary for the long-term health of the economy, even if they come at a cost in the short run. History offers countless examples of why central bank independence matters. Take the 1970s, a decade marked by oil shocks, runaway inflation, and stagnant growth. Back then, intense political pressure led to disastrous economic policies that fueled inflation and eroded the value of the dollar. It took years of painful interest rate hikes and economic hardship to restore confidence in the Fed and bring inflation under control. The lesson was clear. When politics dictate monetary policy, the public pays the price. Fast forward to today, and the echoes of that turbulent era are growing louder. Former President Donald Trump, never one to shy away from controversy, has reignited a fierce debate by launching a series of increasingly personal attacks on Jerome Powell. In a move that stunned both politicians and economists, Trump recently called Powell a terrible Fed chair, publicly expressing regret for appointing him. Trump's words did not stop there. He has repeatedly labeled Powell stupid for not lowering interest rates, painting the chair as an obstacle to economic growth and, by extension, his own political ambitions. It is important to note that Trump himself appointed Powell to the position of Fed Chair in November of the year 2017, during his first term as president. Powell's four-year term is slated to end in May of 2026, but the political drama surrounding his leadership has reached fever pitch long before that date. Trump's relentless public criticism is not just personal, it is strategic. He wants lower interest rates, believing that cheaper borrowing will supercharge the economy and bolster his campaign for a return to the White House. But the Fed, under Powell, has resisted these demands, pointing to global uncertainty, much of it created by Trump's own trade and tariff policies, as reason for caution. This public feud is more than just political theater. It is making investors nervous and sending tremors through financial markets. According to a recent Gallup survey, only about 37% of Americans express confidence in Powell's economic policy recommendations. That means nearly two-thirds of the population is uneasy about the direction of America's monetary policy. A striking statistic in a nation where faith in the Fed has long been a bedrock of financial stability. Financial heavyweights are sounding the alarm. Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, has made it clear: Fed independence is critical. Political interference has adverse consequences. Senator John Kennedy, never one to mince words, warns that firing Powell would trigger a stock market crash. Senator Tom Tillis echoed this sentiment, stating that such a move would send a shockwave through the markets. These warnings are not idle speculation. They are rooted in history and hard-won experience. Behind closed doors, the stakes are even higher. Rumors are swirling that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has already begun quietly drawing up a list of possible successors should Powell be forced out. Names like Kevin Warsh, Kevin Hassett, and Christopher Waller have started circulating in financial circles. The prospect of the next Fed chair being someone more amenable to political pressure is causing many to wonder whether the very rules of global finance are about to be rewritten. But what would actually happen if the United States, the world's largest economy, suddenly allowed politics to override economic prudence at the highest levels of its financial system? The implications could be seismic, not just for Americans, but for billions of people around the globe. First, let's talk about the dollar, the linchpin of international commerce. For decades, the dollar's status as the world's reserve currency has given the United States unparalleled financial power. It allows America to borrow at lower rates, dominate global trade, and influence economic policy far beyond its shores. But this privileged position is built on trust, the trust that the Federal Reserve will act independently, making sound decisions free from political interference. If that trust is broken, even by the hint of political meddling, the consequences could be swift and severe. George Saravelos, a top strategist at Deutsche Bank, calls the possibility of Powell's removal an underpriced event risk. He warns that even the suggestion of political interference could cause the dollar to drop by as much as 3 to 4% virtually overnight. That may sound abstract, but it would have very real impacts, making American exports cheaper, but also raising the cost of imports, fueling inflation, and reducing the purchasing power of every American household. For many emerging economies that hold reserves in dollars, such a move could trigger financial instability, capital flight, and a cascade of economic crises. The stock market, too, would likely react violently. The mere rumor of Powell's removal sent jitters through Wall Street. Senator Kennedy's stark prediction of a market crash is not hyperbole. The last time the world witnessed a serious crisis of confidence in the Fed was in the 1970s, when fears of political interference contributed to stagflation, an ugly mix of soaring prices and stagnant growth. Retirement accounts, college savings plans, and the dreams of millions of Americans could be put at risk in the blink of an eye. But let's consider another scenario. Suppose Powell, or any future Fed chair, buckles under the weight of political pressure and slashes interest rates when it is not warranted by economic conditions. In the short run, this might boost growth and create a temporary feel-good factor. But the long-term consequences could be much worse. Overstimulating the economy at the wrong time could ignite a cycle of rising prices, eroding the value of the dollar, and ultimately threatening its privileged status in the global monetary system. Francesco Pesole, a senior analyst at ING, has warned that undermining the Fed could jeopardize the dollar's role as the world's reserve currency. If international investors lose faith in the independence of the U.S. central bank, they may start looking for alternatives, perhaps the euro, the Chinese yuan, or even digital currencies. The very system that has allowed America to borrow cheaply and project power around the globe could unravel, shifting the balance of financial power and leaving Americans vulnerable to economic shocks. Yet there is still another possible outcome. Jerome Powell could stand his ground, resolutely defending the Fed's independence in the face of unprecedented pressures. If he succeeds, the tradition of keeping monetary policy separate from politics could endure, preserving the stability that has defined the American and global financial landscape for generations. Markets could breathe a sigh of relief, and history would remember Powell as the chair who protected the Fed's legacy when it mattered most. So, why does all of this matter to you? Whether you are a Wall Street trader, a small business owner, or someone just trying to save for the future, the independence of the Federal Reserve is not an abstract concept. It is a shield that protects your financial well-being. When the Fed is free to make tough, sometimes unpopular decisions, it can keep inflation under control, preserve the value of your savings, and support a healthy job market. But when political forces intrude, history shows that chaos often follows, and ordinary people are the ones who suffer most. For investors, the lesson could not be clearer. Stay vigilant for signs of political interference in the central bank. Monitor the headlines, diversify your savings, and be prepared for sudden shifts in markets, interest rates, and the broader economy. If you have a mortgage, student loans, or a retirement plan, changes in Fed policy can have a direct impact on your monthly payments and long-term financial security. Let's take a closer look at how this might play out in practice. Imagine you are saving to buy a home. If political pressure forces the Fed to cut rates too soon, mortgage rates might fall, making homes more affordable in the short term. But if inflation takes off, those same homes could become far more expensive within a few years, eroding your purchasing power. Alternatively, if markets panic and rates spike upward, homebuyers and businesses could face sharply higher borrowing costs. The ripple effects would be felt in everything from car loans to credit card bills, and even the cost of groceries at your local store. On the global stage, the implications are just as profound. Many countries, from Brazil to India to South Africa, hold large reserves of US dollars as a safeguard against economic shocks. If confidence in the dollar wavers, these nations could face currency crises, capital flight, and rising borrowing costs. The resulting instability could spill over into global supply chains, trade flows, and even geopolitical alliances. In a world already rife with uncertainty, the last thing anyone needs is a crisis of confidence in the anchor of the financial system. Expert voices across the spectrum are raising red flags. Greg Valliere, chief U.S. policy strategist at AGF Investments, has noted that any move to oust Powell would signal the end of Fed independence, a red line that, once crossed, would be difficult to restore. Jamie Dimon has pointed out that central bank independence is not a luxury, but a necessity for maintaining market confidence. And history is littered with cautionary tales. In countries where political leaders have overruled central bankers, the result has often been hyperinflation, lost savings, and years of economic hardship. Let's not forget the legal complexities involved. While the president does have limited authority to remove a Fed chair, the grounds are extremely narrow, usually limited to clear misconduct or incapacity. Any attempt to fire Powell for purely political reasons could trigger a constitutional showdown, further destabilizing markets and undermining America's reputation as a beacon of economic stability. At the same time, the uncertainty itself is damaging. Even if Powell is not removed, the mere perception that the Fed is vulnerable to political interference can shake investor confidence. Financial markets thrive on predictability, and anything that introduces doubt about the future path of interest rates, inflation, or the value of the dollar can send shockwaves around the world. So what can you do to protect yourself? First, stay informed. Follow credible news sources, watch for developments in Washington and on Wall Street, and keep an eye on how markets are reacting. Second, diversify your investments. A well-balanced portfolio can help cushion the blow from sudden market swings. Third, think about your long-term goals. Whether you are saving for retirement, a child's education, or a home, remember that economic cycles are inevitable, but the right strategy can help you weather the storm. There is also a broader lesson here for citizens and policymakers alike. The independence of central banks is not just a technical detail. It is a cornerstone of modern economic life. When we allow short-term political considerations to overrule expert judgment and data-driven decision-making, we put at risk not just our own prosperity, but the stability of the entire global system. Let's take a brief detour through history for context. In the aftermath of World War II, central banks across Europe were stripped of their independence, leading to disastrous bouts of hyperinflation in countries like Hungary and Germany. In more recent times, countries such as Turkey and Argentina have suffered repeated currency crises after political leaders overruled central bankers, erasing the savings of millions and plunging entire economies into chaos. These examples serve as stark warnings of what can happen when central bank independence is sacrificed on the altar of political expediency. Even in the United States, the Fed's independence has been tested before. During the 1960s and 70s, Presidents Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon pressured the Fed to keep rates low, hoping to boost growth and secure electoral victories. The result was a decade of economic turmoil, culminating in the painful Volcker shock, a series of dramatic interest rate hikes under Fed Chair Paul Volcker in the early 1980s that finally tamed inflation, but only after a deep recession. And yet, through wars, recessions, and political storms, the tradition of central bank independence has endured. Former Fed chairs from Alan Greenspan to Ben Bernanke to Janet Yellen have all faced political pressure, but each found ways to uphold the integrity of the institution. Their legacy is a reminder that, while the threats are real, so too is the possibility of resilience. So as you follow the headlines, remember, the battle over the Fed's future is not just a Washington drama. It is a story that touches every corner of your financial life, from the dollars in your wallet to the future of the global economy. The stakes could not be higher. In the end, the question remains: will the United States stand firm in defending the independence of its central bank, or will it succumb to the siren song of political convenience? The answer will shape not just the next few years, but the economic destiny of generations to come. Here is a final, little-known fact that underscores just how vital central bank independence is. Throughout history, Even during times of war and national crisis, Fed chairs have risked their jobs, and sometimes their reputations, to defend the principle that economic policy must be based on facts, not politics. It is not just about interest rates and inflation targets. It is about preserving the basic trust that makes the world's financial system work. So stay curious, stay informed, and do not let these crucial headlines pass you by. If you found this deep dive helpful, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you do not miss our next exploration of the forces shaping global economics and technology.